Seizing an American Empire, 1865 to 1913. Imperialism, the policy and practice of exploiting nations and peoples for the benefit of an imperial power, either directly through military occupation and colonial rule, or indirectly through economic domination of resources and markets. This will be our focus of study for this unit. After the end of this unit of study, you should be able to master the following focus questions. What factors motivated Americans' new imperialism after the Civil War? How and why did America expand its influence in the Pacific before the Spanish-American War, or War of 1898? 3. What were the causes of the Spanish-American War, and what were its major events? 4. What were the consequences of the Spanish-American War for American foreign policy? 5. What reasons were behind Theodore Roosevelt's rapid rise to the presidency, and what were the main elements of his foreign policy? And 6. How did Presidents Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson expand America's international involvement? Before we begin our study of American imperialism, it's important to look at where imperialism started and its roots. For Britain and France in the latter part of the 19th century, the two main imperialist powers were Britain and France. Britain was able to create its empire primarily through superior technology, the Maxim gun, quinine medicines, and steamboats. The U.S. foreign policy before 1895 had long established a tradition of expansion across the continent, and now it sought to expand further overseas, either directly or indirectly, through the acquisition of colonial possessions and the exportation of cultural ideas and institutions. American foreign policy of the United States before 1895 maintained normal diplomatic and trade ties with foreign nations. In foreign policy, U.S. officials showed little interest in Africa. From the words of Henry Cabot Lodge, we must not be left behind. We're going to see ideological and religious argument. Scholars, authors, and religious leaders and politicians supplied related arguments for American imperialism that combined social Darwinism. American ideas and institutions were superior to those of inferior nations, a belief in racial inequality, and Anglo-Saxon superiority. American imperialists often rationalized actions by expressing the opinion that people of Anglo-Saxon descent were from a superior culture, which would be take up the white man's burden. Evangelical Christianity. The spread of Christianity would help lesser nations develop morally. Reverend Josiah Strong in Our Country, Its Present Crisis, Its Possible Future in 1886 dealt with the question, when and how should America begin to look beyond its continental borders to the world beyond? He suggested that the U.S. look overseas for the future. He considered the Anglo-Saxon people to be superior and picked by God to lead the world and spread its values and religion to others. President William McKinley was elected on an imperialist platform. Strategic concerns. Captain Alfred T. Mahan emphasized the importance of a navy in the imperial expansion, which would be known as Mahanism. He would write a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, 1660 to 1783, published in 1890, that traced Britain's growth as a world power, linking it to the growth of sea power. If the United States were to emerge as a world power, the following things needed to happen. First, a modern fleet. An expanded modern navy was needed to be built of steel. The need to establish naval bases in the Caribbean. This would help protect the United States due to the European powers expanding in the Pacific along with Japan. There also needs an increased demand for an isthmus canal to bring Pacific and Atlantic coasts together. If the U.S. were to be a major sea power, an increase in harbors, refueling and repair station, trade ships, etc. around the world would be needed, especially in the Pacific. A need to acquire Hawaii and other Pacific islands. With a larger modern navy and more naval bases, the United States could then expand and protect America's international trade. Economic designs. The Second Industrial Revolution had generated a desire for new markets in which American manufacturers could sell their wares. Added to this was renewed European competition to colonize, this time in Asia and the Pacific Rim. American agricultural products had long competed with other nations on the world market. Now the industrial base had expanded to a point where many believed that it could do so as well. The primary goal of the American government's imperialistic politics was commercial expansion. In other words, when in doubt, it's all about money. The Depression of the 1890s strengthened the foreign trade argument. Economic conditions that fueled support for foreign trade included a huge increase in the amount of manufactured goods produced in America. American prosperity now depended on larger access to foreign markets and resources which the highest percentage of Americans favored, increased international trade. Here we see the United States expansion in the Pacific in 1867 through 1899, pursuing a vision of commercial empire in the Pacific. The United States steadily expanded its territorial possessions as well as its influence there in the late 19th century. Expansion in the Pacific. Secretary of State William H. Seward paved the way for larger U.S. presence in world affairs. Seward purchased Alaska from the Russians in 1867. He also approved the occupation of Midway Island and pushed American trade on Japan. The purchase was referred to as Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. Mocking the Alaskan Purchase, this political cartoon shows President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William H. Seward welcoming the two new senators from Alaska, an Eskimo and a penguin. In 1878, in Samoa, granted the United States a naval base at Pago Pago and requested U.S. intervention to settle disputes if necessary. Germany and Britain worked out similar arrangements with other islands in the Samoan group. When Civil War broke out in 1887, in a peace conference in Berlin, all three countries established a protectorate over Samoa in 1899. Hawaii. The Hawaiian Islands were united in 1795. Hawaiian royalty had, in 1875, entered into an agreement with the United States to import sugar duty-free. In other words, they don't pay any taxes. This created a boom in the production of sugar, and soon American planters, known as heiaus in Hawaii, had flooded the island nation. In 1887, King Kalakaua granted voting rights only to the wealthy. Treaties integrated into the Hawaiian Islands into the American economy and gave the United States control over Pearl Harbor. Then the McKinley Tariff in 1890 eliminated the duty-free status on sugar. Now, American sugar plantation growers would have to pay tariffs to import their Hawaiian sugar into the United States. Americans in Hawaii want the U.S. to annex them. The problem is, Hawaii is a sovereign nation. Enter Queen Liliuokalani. Hawaii's new and last ruler tried to limit growing of U.S. power starting in 1891 by first removing the voting qualification of the heiaus. John L. Stevens. In 1893, the royal family was ousted by these same planners with the help of U.S. Ambassador John L. Stevens, with the help of U.S. Marines, organized a revolution against the Queen, and a new government was established with the heiaus in control. They declared a republic in 1894, with Sanford B. Dole as the first president. The new government requested territorial status and an annexation by the United States. President Grover Cleveland, whose research found that a majority of the native Hawaiians opposed annexation and refused to accept it, as he did not want to reward the dishonorable actions of the planners. President William McKinley had no such concerns and secured the ratification of the treaty in 1898, despite protests by native Hawaiians. As other imperial powers looked on, the United States abandoned its traditional principles to rush headlong into world affairs. The Spanish-American War. Cuba Libre. Cubans rebelled against Spain several times in the 19th century. In 1895, José Martí began another revolt. Each time insurrection broke out, it was put down bloodily. Motivated by a desire to protect American property, investments, as well as the Cuban rights, the Cleveland administration advised Spain to adopt reforms. Yellow journalism. Newspaper circulation wars. In 1895-1897, William Randolph Hearst of the New York Journal challenged Joseph Pulitzer of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the New York World for readership. Yellow journalism was a deliberate, sensational journalism of scandal and exposed and designed to attract an urban mass audience and increase advertising revenues. It's got its name from a popular comic strip called The Yellow Kid because he wore a yellow nightshirt, as you see in the political cartoon. The press sympathized with Cuban freedom fighters rebelling against Spain. When another attempt broke out in 1895, the Spanish commander, General Weyler, placed all Cubans in detention centers to prevent more from joining the cause. The press called him the Butcher. Sensationalist journalists around America against feelings against Spain and the continued rebellion led to calls for American intervention. Frederick Remington was sent by Hearst to cover the Cuban uprising. Remington will send a wire to Hearst complaining that there is no war. Hearst replied to Remington, "You provide the pictures, and I'll provide the war." An example of this is the drawing to the Spaniards searching women on American steamers. To the reader, they see Spanish males looking at a naked American woman. Now, these were actually searched by Spanish female authorities to see if she was bringing any letters to Jose Marti. So it's just a half-truth. Growing tensions. Once McKinley was inaugurated, issues in Cuba grew even more tenuous. Rebels released a captured letter to Hearst Journal written by Spain's ambassador to the United States, Señor Tope de Lom, to a friend in Cuba. In it, the ambassador criticized the United States president as a weak leader. Although essentially a true assessment of McKinley, the letters touched off a storm of protest in the United States against Spain, forcing Delome to resign his post. In January of 1898, the USS Maine was ordered to Havana Harbor on a friendly mission. Although it was preparing to evacuate American citizens in the face of increasing riots against Spain, shortly thereafter the Maine exploded, killing 260 sailors. At first, the explosion was blamed on a mine in the harbor, but a 1976 study revealed that it had been an internal explosion. As if the news of the Maine were not disturbing enough, the New York Journal sought to sensationalize the incident by offering a $50,000 reward for the perpetrators, the equivalent of $1.3 million. On March 27th, the United States sent several demands to Spain to agree to a ceasefire. On April 9th, the Governor General of Cuba offered the Spanish rebels an armistice. Spain indicated a willingness to negotiate over Cuba's independence. McKinley yielded to public pressure by sending a war message to Congress on April 11th. McKinley's war message to Congress called for U.S. intervention to help free the oppressed Cubans, having correctly perceived a pro-war attitude among Americans. Congress was not unanimous in its declaration because many members feared that the U.S. might be improperly perceived by the international community as ganging up on a weaker nation to gain territory. To get support for the war, the Teller Amendment, a congressional resolution, was adopted in 1898 to soothe the critics and guaranteed Cuba's independence, stating that the United States had no designs on Cuba. It also called for the Cuban self-government. On April 20th, 1898, Congress would declare war on Spain. On April 24th, Spain would declare war on the United States. The Philippine Theater. The war only lasted 113 days. John Hay, United States ambassador to England, had written Theodore Roosevelt, referring to it as a splendid little war. Under Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt resigned to participate in the fighting. Before he left, he ordered Commodore Dewey, the man you see pictured there, to take and destroy the Spanish fleet in Manila. Emilio Aguinaldo was returned from exile to aid Filipino insurrectionists against Spain. In the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1st, 1898, Commodore George Dewey led the Pacific Fleet and quickly demolished the Spanish Navy there, provisioned his ships, and left to attack the Spanish colony in the Philippine Islands. In just hours, the entire Spanish Asiatic fleet is sunk. What is interesting is that the Spanish commander, Montojo, was informed that Dewey had ships and had seen in Subic Bay that morning, but he believed they expected an attack the following morning due to mines in the bay. However, Dewey had detailed information of the state of the Spanish challenges and the lack of preparedness of the Spanish fleet, prompting him to enter the bay immediately at 5:41 a.m. with the now famous phrase, "You may fire when ready, Gridley." The USS Olympia's captain was instructed to begin the destruction of the Spanish flotilla. 2 hours later, Captain Gridley messaged that only 15 rounds of 5-inch ammunition remained per gun. He ordered an immediate withdrawal. To preserve morale, he informed the crews that the halt in the battle was to allow the crews to have breakfast. A captain's conference on the Olympia revealed little damage, and no men had been killed. It was also discovered that the original ammunition message had been garbled. Instead of only 15 rounds of ammunition per gun, the message was meant to say only 15 rounds of ammunition per gun has been expanded. Cancel breakfast! Breakfast was immediately canceled, much of it to the disappointment of the crews, and the battle commenced. The Spanish raised a white flag, and the battle was over at 12:40 p.m. Dewey had no soldiers to put on the shore, and he remained several months waiting for reinforcements, as the British and the German warships cruised offshore waiting to strike if the Americans did not seize the Philippines. On August 13th, Emilio Aguinaldo declared the Philippines independent, and on June 12, 1898, with his help, Manila was captured. On August 13th, victory led to the annexation of Hawaii and the desire to keep the Philippines for future markets. The Cuban Campaign. U.S. casualties. U.S. casualties resulted more from disease and exposure, 5,000, than from the battle of 300. The Battle of Santiago de Cuba. On the morning of May 29th, Cervera's squadron was sighted inside the safety of Santiago Bay. So long as Cervera remained within Santiago Harbor, his fleet was relatively safe. The guns of the city were quite sufficient to make up for the deficiency in his own, and the area was well defended with sea mines, torpedoes, and other obstructions. On July 3rd, nevertheless, the Spanish government ordered Cervera 6 ships to break out from the bay. All were intercepted by the American battleships, and cruisers under Rear Admiral William T. Sampson and Commodore William S. Schley. In a running battle, superior American firepower reduced Cervera's ships to burning wrecks. Casualties. In the course of the fighting, Sampson and Schley's fleet lost a miraculously 1 man killed, Yeoman George H. Ellis of the USS Brooklyn, and 10 wounded. Cervera lost all 6 of his ships, as well as 323 killed and 151 wounded. In addition, approximately 70 officers, including the admiral and 1,500 men, were taken prisoner. San Juan Hill. The Rough Riders. The army assembled in Tampa. Among them were the 1st Volunteer Cavalry, Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders. They were a special regiment made up of former Ivy League athletes, Irish policemen, cowboys from Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas Rangers, and including Cherokee and Choctaws. On July 1st, 7,000 soldiers took the fortified village of El Caney, while much larger forces attacked San Juan Hill, including the Rough Riders, who were on foot, since their horses were sent elsewhere. General Joseph Wheeler, a former Confederate general of the Civil War, led the division through the siege of Santiago. During the excitement of the battle, Wheeler supposedly called out, "Let's go, boys, we got them damn Yankees on the run again." But the old general confusing his wars. He thought he was back in the Civil War at Bull Run. The charge. The battle for San Juan Hill, Roosevelt ordered his men to rise and charge the Spaniards. Although shot in the arm, TR headlong galloped towards the Spanish lines. For his bravery, Roosevelt was put in for the Congressional Medal of Honor. It did not come due to his scathing letter he would later write about the treatment of veterans that fought in the Spanish-American War. He finally was awarded his medal posthumously in 2001 by President Bill Clinton. Roosevelt was a hero. A crucial role in capturing San Juan Hill was played by the 10th Negro Cavalry, known as the Buffalo Soldiers. The military victory in Cuba was swift, with naval power again providing decisive U.S. forces to seize Puerto Rico. On July 16th, General Linares would finally surrender, and on July 25th, Puerto Rico would be invaded. The United States gained quick victories in both theaters of the Spanish-American War. Its naval power decisive, with Commodore Dewey destroying the enemy fleet in the Philippines on the left, and the 2nd U.S. Naval Forces cutting off the Spanish in Cuba to the right. On July 25, 1898, American troops invaded Puerto Rico. The troops met little opposition and soon occupied the island. General Nelson A. Miles issued a statement to Americans of Puerto Rico saying, "We bring you protection, not only to yourselves, but to your property." The conflict ended on August 12th, when Spain asked for peace. Consequences of victory. McKinley's motives. As a result of the Spanish-American War, William McKinley expressed a desire to acquire the Philippines. American business leaders wanted the United States to keep the Philippines so they could penetrate the market so nearby China. Not long after the United States' control, the Roman Catholic Church status as the Philippines' official religion was over. English would become the official language, opening the door for Protestant missionaries in the region. McKinley summarized the motivating ideas for American imperialism. First, national glory. Second, commerce. 3, a racial superiority. And 4, evangelism. It also should be noted that if the United States had left the Philippines, Great Britain and Germany more than likely would have taken it. The Treaty of Paris. The treaty included the following items. The armistice required Spain to accept Cuban independence. Spain would cede, which means to give, Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States. The Spanish also ceded the Philippines to the United States for $20 million, sparking a strong, bitter debate over imperialism. The Anti-Imperialist League, that included William Jennings Bryan, Andrew Carnegie, and Jane Addams, opposed the Treaty of Paris. They claimed that acquiring the Philippines denied life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to the Filipino people. Did the Constitution follow the flag? Anti-imperialists claimed yes. The imperialists said no. And the insular cases the Supreme Court made between 1901 and 1903, insular meaning the island cases, that constitutional rights were not automatically extended to territorial possessions. The power to decide was left to Congress. The treaty would barely pass the Senate 57 to 27 by 2 votes on February 6, 1899. In the political cartoon, we see Uncle Sam considers the expansionist menu offered by President McKinley. The Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, was only the appetizer. The Philippine American War, 1899 to 1902. The Filipino nationalists were fighting Spain for independence before U.S. intervention. Rebel leaders such as Emilio Aguinaldo welcomed Dewey's victory and issued a Declaration of Independence proclaiming the Philippine Republic. The Filipinos felt betrayed by the Treaty of Paris. The American ownership and the same guerrillas that Dewey had relied on to secure Manila before the army could arrive now fought against U.S. colonization or control of the Philippines. A long, brutal war erupted between the United States and the Filipinos, in which an estimated 400,000 Filipinos died, most in concentration camps, similar to what the Spanish had in Cuba. The Anti-Imperialist League was revived. American brutality that it was reported in the press, reviving the Anti-Imperialist League. Andrew Carnegie offered $20 million to buy independence for the Philippines. Mark Twain called it a quagmire that the United States should try not to get under the heel or intervene in any other country that is not ours. Senator Orr led the opposition in the Congress, stating that in the Constitution, no power is given the federal government to acquire territory to be held in the government permanently as colonies or to conquer the alien people that hold them in subjugation. Unfortunately, I guess the senator forgot that the United States did that to the Indians. The ministers denounced imperialism as anti-Christian. Organizing the colonies. In Latin America, where no major powers challenged American objectives, the United States was more successful in exercising imperial power. The Philippines eventually was added as a territory to the United States, and Roosevelt named future President William Howard Taft its first U.S. governor. The Jones Act. Succeeding legislation provided for greater Filipino control of the islands, culminating in their independence on July 4, 1946. They were going to be granted independence earlier, but due to the Second World War, they had to wait. Puerto Rico, which had come under U.S. control in the peace treaty with Spain, was organized to provide a bastion for future European aggression and as a guard post for future Isthmus Canal linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. American annexation of Puerto Rico had mixed results as transportation and sanitation were improved and public and education was developed. The Foraker Act of 1900, Puerto Ricans established a government on the island and its residents were declared citizens of the Commonwealth or Puerto Rico, but not Spain. Dr. Walter Reed, named head of the Army Yellow Fever Commission in 1900, proved that mosquitoes carry yellow fever, and the Commission's experiments led the way to effective control of the disease worldwide. The United States would finally grant citizenship and other rights to Puerto Ricans in 1917 and would be allowed to craft its own constitution, but was limited in its freedom by the Platt Amendment, which placed restrictions on its rights. Cuba had to sell or lease the United States for calling in naval stations, which would become the U.S. naval base in Guantanamo Bay. Imperial rivalries in East Asia. The First Sino-Japanese War. By 1895, Japan began to expand by defeating China in the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, taking several islands and, more importantly, revealing China's weakness against aggression. By the mid-1890s, several European powers had carved out spheres of influence in China, a region dominated and controlled by an outside power. The American business community was alarmed by European actions that would limit American opportunities in China. In 1899, Secretary of State John Hay asked the imperial powers to maintain a commercial and financial open door, free trade, for all nations. The open door became a doctrine of U.S. foreign policy and was used to dominate foreign markets. Japan favored the open door policy, but Russia did not. In 1900, a group of Chinese nationalists known as the Boxers, or Fist of Righteous Harmony, rebelled against the foreign encroachment into their country, but they were eventually put down by intervention from a joint assault of British, German, Russian, and Japanese forces. In the political cartoon to the left, we see the United States usually preferred the annexation of trade to the annexation of territory. The open door policy promised to advance American commercial expansion, but Uncle Sam had to restrain other imperialists with colonial objections. Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy. Theodore Roosevelt was the first modern president. In fact, it can be argued that he, more than any other president, shaped what America expected of presidents in this era. In his youth, Teddy suffered from asthma when he was young. He drove himself to physical feats to make his own body. At Harvard, he boxed and wrestled and graduated with honors. Tragedy struck him in 1884. In the same house, on the same day, his mother, Mittie, died, and 11 hours later, his first wife, Alice, died, who had been given birth to their firstborn, a daughter also named Alice, 2 days earlier. "The light has gone out of my life," said Roosevelt, and so he sought solace in his ranch in South Dakota. Roosevelt, the rich blue blood from New York, would learn the hard life of a cowboy in South Dakota. He had later claimed, "It knocked the snobbery out of me." His return to politics. Roosevelt had a simple philosophy. In the world there were two camps, good and evil, and he was determined to fight evil as he saw in political corruption. He served 3 terms in the New York Assembly. He cleaned up the New York City's corrupt police department as chief of police. He campaigned for McKinley in 1896 and was awarded Assistant Secretary of Navy. His glory as a Rough Rider with the 1st Volunteer Cavalry in charge up of San Juan Hill got him elected to New York governor. From vice president to president. Political bosses in New York found Teddy Roosevelt, TR, hard to control. He could not be bought. With his rising star, the political bosses were afraid the next step would be President of the United States. Boss Platt came up with an idea: bump him upstairs to be McKinley's VP. And that way, in 4 years, no one will remember Teddy. McKinley would find himself once again running against William Jennings Bryan. The main issue was imperialism. TR crisscrossed the nation condemning Bryan's communistic and socialist doctrines. McKinley would easily defeat Bryan, 292 to 155 electoral votes, and by more than a million votes in the popular category. Then McKinley was assassinated on September 14, 1901, by Leon Czolgosz, making Roosevelt the youngest president ever to hold the office. Mark Hanna would say, "Now that damn cowboy is president of the United States." Big stick policy. The modern president. TR became the youngest president in U.S. history at the age of 42. TR believed in using what he called the bully pulpit. In other words, if you don't really get your way, go before the American people and use the press to convince Congress. TR also believed in the old African proverb, speak softly and carry a big stick, and you shall go far. For using in diplomacy, you speak softly. If that doesn't work, bam, you hit them with the big stick. Roosevelt did have his critics who believed that he was too bombastic, too loud, and didn't care whatever came out of his mouth or whom he insulted or hurt by using name calling. The Spanish-American War intensified American interest in the canal through Central America, and there seemed to be a need for a canal. The Panama Canal. The Hay-Posset Treaty in 1901 between the United States and Great Britain granted the U.S. exclusive rights to a canal in Latin America. Choosing Panama, the U.S. Congress expressed a willingness to pay as much as $40 million for the rights of the new Panama Canal Company. In 1903, the Hay-Herran Treaty between the United States and Colombia gave U.S. rights to a 6-mile wide zone in Panama for 100 years, after initially paying $10 million and annually $250,000 to Colombia. On August 12th, Colombia's Senate failed to ratify the treaty, hoping to hold out for $25 million. In 1903, in November, Panamanians broke out in revolution after negotiations broke down between the United States and Colombia. A new government was organized. Panamanian independence was declared on November 4th and led by a major investor in the new Panama Canal Company, Felipe Buena Varela. On November 6th, the revolution was recognized officially by the United States, who secretly supported the rebels by preventing Colombian troops from intervening into Panama. On November 18th, the Hay-Buena Varela Treaty gave the U.S. similar terms as it had sought from Colombia, rent payments not beginning until 9 years, with the U.S. receiving permanent rights to the Canal Zone. And the debate over the Panama, Roosevelt bragged, "I took the canal. Let Congress debate it." After the revolution, Panama became a U.S. protectorate in 1904. In building the canal, Theodore Roosevelt's strategy in acquiring it revealed a growth of good relationships with Great Britain. Construction of the Panama Canal began in 1904 and was completed in 1914. In 1906, Roosevelt became the first president of the United States to go outside the United States as president, visiting Panama in the spring of 1906. Here we see him pictured to the left, sitting at a crane at the Panama Canal. It cost the United States $366 million to build it. In 1921, a treaty with Colombia gave them $25 million for the loss of Panama, plus duty-free use of the canal in exchange for the recognition of Panamanian independence. The Roosevelt Corollary. In 1902, Venezuela defaults on loans from Britain, Germany, and Italy. In the Dominican Republic in 1903, after the Dominican Republic defaulted on several debts to European nations, many nations considered sending in troops to force them to repay their debts, because European intervention violated the Monroe Doctrine. The U.S. would intervene when needed. The U.S. was responsible for proper redress for wrongs inflicted on a foreign state by a nation within the American sphere of influence. Chronic wrongdoing in Latin America might force the U.S. to step in as an international police force, influencing when it benefited U.S. interest. On December 6, 1904, the Roosevelt Corollary was adopted. In the light of the debt default of the Dominican Republic, Roosevelt sent a message to Congress, which became known as the Roosevelt Corollary, which was designed to restore order in Latin American affairs and prevent European intervention. Roosevelt's policy, asserting U.S. authority to intervene in the affairs of Latin American nations, was a logical extension of the Monroe Doctrine. It attempted to justify U.S. intervention and authority in Latin America. Latin Americans resented U.S. claims to unilateral authority. But what is not mentioned in the book, and it is true, if he had not done this, Germany, Britain, Belgium, and other countries would have to intervene and possibly set up colonies. Relationships with Japan. At the beginning of the 20th century, Japan and Russia were more deeply involved in East Asia than the United States. The main Asian imperialist powers around the turn of the 20th century was Japan, America's chief rival for domination in the Pacific. In 1904, Japan attacked Russia when Japan felt that the Russians' ambitions counteracted its own. The European powers and the United States felt the Russians would demolish the Japanese. In a brilliant attack on the Russian Navy, Japan destroyed its fleet. Roosevelt sponsored a meeting between the two nations, and as a result was the Treaty of Portsmouth in 1905. America supported Japan in the Russo-Japanese War because Russia had obstructed open trade in Manchuria, the open door. Roosevelt in 1904 offered to mediate on condition that the open door be recognized regarding China, and negotiated the Treaty of Portsmouth to end the war and mark Japan's emergence as a major power. Japan gained a recognition of preeminence in Korea and some small territorial concessions, including half of the Sakhalin Island, South Manchuria Railway, and southern Liaotung Peninsula. Although militarily defeated, Russia did not have to pay indemnity to Japan, but had its dominant role in Manchuria reduced. Roosevelt would be the first sitting president to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906 for his mediating efforts. While Roosevelt met with Russia and Japanese leaders to secure the peace, he sent William Howard Taft to Tokyo to secure an agreement with Japan, which Japan disavowed any claim to the Philippines in return for the U.S. recognition of Japan's control of the Korean Peninsula. However, distrust reigned on both sides, and when the city of San Francisco ordered Asian students to attend separate schools, Japan protested the action vigorously. Roosevelt forced the city to change its policy while securing the Gentleman's Agreement that Japan would no longer issue visas for its citizens to the United States. The Great White Fleet was the popular nickname for the United States battle fleet that completed the circumnavigation of the globe from December 16th, 1907 to February 22nd, 1909, by the order of Theodore Roosevelt. It consisted of 16 battleships divided into 2 squadrons, along with various escorts. Roosevelt sought to demonstrate growing American military power and blue water navy capacity, hoping to enforce treaties and protect overseas holdings. The U.S. Congress appropriated funds to build American sea power, and beginning with just 90 small ships, over one-third of them wooden, the Navy quickly grew to include new modern steel fighting vessels. The hulls of these ships were painted a stark white, giving the Armada the nickname the Great White Fleet. Taft and Wilson's foreign policy. Taft. Republican President William Howard Taft followed many of Roosevelt's policies, especially through the use of what he called dollar diplomacy, substituting dollars for bullets to promote U.S. interests in the Caribbean, Latin America, and East Asia. Taft's State Department sent foreign aid to support American companies in these regions. Taft also intervened militarily to ensure political and economic stability in these areas in which he believed U.S. interests were threatened. Most notably, Taft sent U.S. Marines to intervene in the revolution in Nicaragua starting in 1909. Wilson's intervention. He opposed big stick imperialism and dollar diplomacy. The Jones Act gave full territorial status, universal male suffrage to Puerto Ricans. A Bill of Rights granted independence once a stabilized government could be formed in 1917. U.S. citizenship living in governing Panama in 1914, and no free rides of passage for U.S. ships. This angered TR and Lodge, and the British were in full support. When William Jennings Bryan was appointed as his Secretary of State, he appeared to usher in a new period in which interventionism would not be emphasized, and submit to international commissions, and negotiated a conciliation treaty within 21 nations, providing a one-year cooling-off period when disputes arose between signatories, rather than engage immediately in open hostilities. But Wilson was a hypocrite. He repudiated the intervention policies of the Republicans when campaigning for president, but became the most interventionist president in American history. He sent interventionist forces more than Taft and Roosevelt combined, seeking to expand U.S. dominance in the Caribbean, to expand economic interest, and possessing a racist attitude of Latin Americans as being inferior. He intervened in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba. Mexico. Mexico. Wilson also became embroiled in the Mexican Revolution. Pancho Villa was opposed to the Carranza government. He originally had support of Woodrow Wilson, but he raided the United States in hopes of provoking intervention against the Carranza government. In retaliation for a raid in Texas and New Mexico led by Villa, Wilson sent troops into Mexico. United States General John J. Blackjack Pershing led these 6,000 soldiers in chasing Villa through the mountains of northern Mexico for nearly a year. By 1917, the American troops were sent home, as Wilson had become distracted by the threat of a great war in Europe.